Hello and welcome to Counterpressed on The Ringer and Spotify. I'm in the studio with Tim Stillman, and joining us from Munich will be Kathryn Batte. On today's show, Arsenal are through to the semi-finals of the Champions League after another chaotic and amazing clash with Chelsea. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Manchester United losing to Bayern Munich. They came so close, but they are also out of Europe. We'll get into all those games and the drama on today's show. Tim, so much to talk about. I think the overarching feeling for me, before we get on to the Arsenal-Chelsea game, which is where we're going to start on today's show, is the fact that these two teams always deliver so much drama and great games, and we had yet more of that last night.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the headline of this tie. For me, if you cover women's football or are a fan of women's football in England, this tie is a gift, because this is two genuine women's football rivals. So obviously the men's teams don't like each other, but this is a very organic women's football rivalry, long-standing enmity between the teams, differing contexts, great storylines, and basically for 180 minutes they swung at each other. There was almost no caginess in the tie whatsoever. There was tension, there was drama, there was controversy. Obviously I'm playing the role of gracious winner now, so I get to say all of this rather than complaining about the referee, which I can understand why Chelsea would do that, but I just think this delivered massively. When these games, sometimes they don't, sometimes you can get two cagey, tense, rubbish games. I think both of these were box office.
No, we are very blessed in the WSL that Chelsea-Arsenal is such a good rivalry, and it always does deliver really good games. And I feel like when I put my sort of men's football hat on for a minute, you know, when Sky build up those Super Sunday Premier League games, especially when Mourinho was at Chelsea, United and then Spurs, and you would get so excited on a Sunday, and the montage would get you and trick you into thinking this is going to be the most epic battle, and then basically Mourinho's team would slug out a 0-0, and you think, God, I can't believe I just watched that. Never the case with Arsenal-Chelsea when they face each other in any competition recently. We had Jonas versus Emma Hayes, which was the gift that kept on giving. Now we've got Sonia, who is kind of hitting her peak of like great memeable moments. Renee Slegers, I don't think yet has showed her comedic value, so maybe I want a little bit more from Slegers in that respect. But it's just so good, and we know obviously online it can get a little bit spicy between the two fan bases, but in general I just think it is such an entertaining fixture, and it's so good for the women's game, and we are so lucky in England to have this, that I get addicted to it. I just want more servings, and I'm sad now that we won't get that unless they might meet in the FA Cup final. I guess that's our only hope of another version of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you sat next to me in the press box last night, and the really weird thing about this game, I felt really bullish and confident all day, not a trace of nerves, and then it kicked off, and I realised like my leg was doing that a lot. And I was like, am I shaking because I'm slightly underdressed and it's a bit cold? Or am I shaking because of nerves? And really, it was the latter. It was, I mean, I feel like I went through the mincer. But in terms of like, this is, to me, across Europe, the best that women's football has to offer. I think if you're a neutral, the only shame is this wasn't the final. I wouldn't be able to take that. Nor I think would Jessie, coming from the same kind of perspective as me. But can you think of another proper rivalry like this in European women's football? PSG Lyon, no. PSG are Lyon's feeder club. Maybe Wolfsburg Bayern. There's quite a good one there, but this has just been going on so long, and it's got so many angles to it where Chelsea have kind of taken Arsenal's domestic dominance, which hurts as an Arsenal fan, but at the same time Arsenal have that European Cup thing as well, so it's just got so many different angles to it, and I just think that this game showed that. It was a 180-minute slugfest. And there were some great goals in it as well. Maybe not last night, but...
Well, we're going to get into all that. But of course, you will notice, and listeners to last week's Thursday show will remember that Jessie and Becky are not here today. And it's not because Jessie had to flee the country after this expected result, because I think, we all kind of maybe saw the result, but not necessarily the circumstances playing out. But Jessie and Becky are on a Spotify trip, flying over as we speak to watch Barcelona, Real Madrid in the other Champions League quarter-final. But unfortunately, that game is well and truly done and dusted, unless I am about to jinx the most incredible, glorious Real Madrid comeback of all time. But let's be real, that's probably not happening. So yes, no Jessie and Becky today, but we'll catch up with Jessie next week to chat all things Chelsea. But let's get into what happened last night at Stamford Bridge next. So, Tim, there are so many places where we could start with this, and I think you and I are both feel the same way in that so often with these games as well, we get bogged down in the ref chat. And it happened at the Emirates earlier this season with that 1-1 game when we ended up talking about the refereeing. It happened in the first leg when we ended up talking about the refereeing, and I think that overshadowed the Lauren James screamer. So I don't want to start with the refereeing today. We will get to it, of course, because it was, a big flashpoint of the whole thing. But I want to talk more about how the game played out, because we knew going into this that Chelsea had to start hard and fast. They tend to do that anyway in games, in most of their games, but especially games against Arsenal. Happened at the Emirates this season, where they probably could have built themselves a bigger lead. They didn't. It happened in the first leg at the Emirates when James and Thompson had those early chances. They don't take them. And it happened again at Stamford Bridge with Thompson having 2 really good first half chances, Nuskin having a brilliant first half chance. None of those were even on target, and those are the things that really stood out to me in the first chunk for Chelsea. And when those goals didn't start to land, I started to feel like I was watching Sonia Bonpastor kind of just live the reality of it's not going to be our night. She was sort of huffing and puffing and shrugging and turning to her dugout almost in disbelief. Like, how are we not putting one of these chances away? And there's a lot of hypotheticals here in that we don't know how Chelsea taking one of those early chances would have changed the game for Arsenal. But Arsenal didn't really find their feet until much later on, and they managed to create chances once Chelsea were pushing so hard they were leaving gaps in behind. But really, this is a rare game in which Chelsea actually were in control for large parts of that, whereas historically, with these battles that we've seen between these two teams this season, we've seen these like 15-minute chunks of control. But because of the way that Chelsea had to desperately chase this game to win it, they were so on top for so much of the game. Yeah,
absolutely. It's weird, isn't it? Because I was talking to someone at half-time and we were kind of saying, if you go into this game and Arsenal are 3-1 up at half-time on the basis of this game, you probably feel quite relaxed and comfortable. But when the game starts like that, there is an undeniable dynamic that is going to play out, whether Renée Slagers wanted that to happen or not. And some of her selections hinted at this. So I think starting Caitlin Ford, for example, ahead of particularly Chloe Kelly, that's an out-of-possession choice, mainly. That is, Caitlin is the player that is going to fight the hardest to track back. Caitlin played the full 90 minutes and Chloe Kelly didn't get on. That tells you a little bit about the context. But like you say, Chelsea always start quickly, but obviously there was a real impetus for them to do so. And it's so weird, this tie, because it could have gone so many different ways. And Chelsea really, the story for Chelsea is that they didn't take their chances and Arsenal did. Perhaps you'd look as well, Hannah Hampton maybe makes a bit of a mistake in the first leg from the Chloe Kelly shot. Daphne Van Domselaar pulls out a world-class performance in this leg as well. But absolutely, like Chelsea, if they'd scored early, I think this would have been well, I don't think the game would have played out much differently, but the result might have been very, very different. And I couldn't help but look at Sam Kerr and think 2023 Sam Kerr scores in this game at some point. I know she wasn't guilty of missing those chances, but I think she's on the end of one of them, and she's probably a bit more involved. And that's ultimately, I think that is such a big difference in the WSL this season. I think effectively Bunny Shaw is winning the league. I think that is the story, the main kind of story of the WSL season. I think that played out a little bit last night as well.
Yeah, and when we look at that game last season that Chelsea did turn around, Sandy Baltimore scores in the 14th minute and Chelsea have flipped the tide by the end of the first half. There is, in reality, a scenario where that could have happened too, but then you might see Arsenal chasing the game a bit more. And they did actually in the second half. You've got the Stina Blackstenius disallowed goal, which was disallowed rightly for offside, and then you've got Beth Mead hitting the post. So those are situations where we will never know what would have happened if Chelsea had scored early, and it probably would have been even more frantic and chaotic than what we actually did see. But there was almost this ability for Arsenal to kind of like ride it out as the game ticked on. And I felt like by about the hour mark, when Chelsea still hadn't scored, I thought, I don't think they're going to even be able to tie this game to take it into extra time, because in reality they needed 2 goals just to get to the extra 120, which was going to be a big ask. And then Nusken, her head is pushed onto the post, rolls across the line. That was so close. Van Donson's save from Kerr and James. But I just started to then feel like, oh no, this is the reality of this game now. It's too much of an ask at that point to see a way in which they can score 2 goals. Yeah,
definitely. And I think the other thing that's so strange and really compelling about this game as well, first of all, I know in the second half we're going to talk about Manchester United, and we're probably going to talk about their resources. I mean, Arsenal had their 3 first choice centre-halves injured for the second half of this game. Leah Williamson was out of both ties. Steph Catley plays 30-odd minutes of the 180 minutes. So Katie McCabe plays centre-back for well over half of the tie. But at the same time, and then, Arsenal changed goalkeeper as well for the second tie. But what's really weird about this game is just at the point where I felt like Chelsea were losing hope, Stina has that goal, it goes in, and then it's disallowed. And that creates this real electric charge in the stadium where...
It was the loudest cheer of the night.
It was,
from any of the Chelsea fans. It was so loud, and it did kind of wake the team up, I think, a little bit.
Massively. I think it completely changed that last 10 minutes. I think Chelsea, because Stina had a chance just before that, and I felt like Chelsea had got into this, it's not our night. But then that lifted everyone, and Chelsea went right up the other end and so nearly scored 30 seconds later. And that's such a... And how do you account for that, from an Arsenal perspective? How do you account for, we scored a goal, it's disallowed, and now everyone's really up? And so the momentum really, really changed. And then I think it's Nusken had the header that just flashed wide. If that had gone in, I really think the game probably would have gone to extra time.
And we had to, see a lot of classic game management from Arsenal in managing the clock. Early on, I think Taylor Hines gets booked for a very slow throw-in, and the throw-ins had really slowed down as the more the game had progressed. And you expect to see that. But that sort of then added to that frustration.
That's another difference in this game. The first goal kick Arsenal get, the referee has a go at Van Domslaar for time wasting. I don't think she was. I think that was your bog standard. We might pass out, we might not. But she made it clear from the beginning there is going to be no game management here whatsoever. She was, I felt, for 80 minutes, super consistent about not giving fouls, which I'm fine with because she set her stall out. That's what's happening. And from an Arsenal perspective, that was horrible because you want the game to break down, you want breathers, and that wasn't going to happen. And that's another element. I'm not saying it's an unfair element at all, but from an Arsenal perspective, that's another element you have to manage that's unpredictable. Like, what's the referee going to do? And what the referee did was, this game is going to flow. And for a neutral, that probably made it even better.
Yeah, and then the referee had a bit of her own head loss in the last sort of 15-20. Because I thought first half she did well. She didn't actually blow for that much. There weren't that many fouls. And then, second half, I think, I hate to say this because it's such a cliche, but it just felt like the occasion got the better of her, in that the tension and what was at stake.
It got very chaotic,
yeah.
and I think she struggled to manage it from that point,
definitely. But then we look at kind of then what played out once Chelsea do get that late goal, which was Nuskin. We have this real big flashpoint, and we'd had all the controversy in the first leg of Chelsea's disallowed goal that shouldn't have been disallowed, really, for Berman jump on Cadena. And there was a lot of frustration from Sonia Bonpastor about how the VAR hadn't intervened to give the goal. And then we have, in this game, Katie McCabe pulling Alyssa Thompson's hair. Thompson goes down. Bonpastor is sent off for her kind of challenge of the officials on the decision. At that point, it is 1-0 on the night, 3-2 in aggregate, and there's about 30 minutes or so to be played. So I think lots of people will probably agree that it's unclear how much the sending off would have been able to influence the game for Chelsea, but that doesn't change the fact that the VAR missed the call there. I know Katie McCabe put a statement out on her Instagram, literally from the changing room, to say, that wasn't intentional, and she was kind of apologetic in the moment. I think when you look at the footage, it's hard to see that sort of accidental nature, but this is me reading it. I am not Katie McCabe, but her left hand goes to pull her shirt and misses, and her right hand goes to, and grabs the ponytail. So you can understand this is something we've seen in women's football plenty of time, happened just recently in the Euros. Bonpastor mentioned herself that it's happened earlier this season. So it's something that we're used to seeing sendings off for in the women's game. The VAR missed it, didn't review it. It was a completely manic, frantic period of the game. And then it becomes this talking point. And then it takes over the post-match when we do see, and it is comedy gold, so I'm grateful that the gods have delivered us this meme that we can use till the end of time, with Sonia Bonpastor showing a Twitter clip on her phone in the post-match interview and breaking the fourth wall and looking to the camera, which was incredible. So thank you for that, Sonia Bonpastor. But it takes over the whole, narrative and dynamic, and it's really frustrating because I really don't want VAR in the women's game. And
Same.
We're in this really frustrating place where when we don't have it, it's all that we talk about in terms of when things are missed. Oh, we should have VAR, we should have VAR. And then we do have it. The conversation is, oh, why didn't the VAR catch this? Why didn't the VAR do this? So for me, I would just say no VAR, improve the standard of officiating. Officials will still miss things, absolutely. But I think there are things in this game that across both legs that would have been improved with overall better officiating. And I think actually that's where Sonia Bonpastor fell on the face of it in her post-match, which was she wants to see better officiating. She was frustrated that the VAR didn't, intervene, and she was sort of asking the question, what's the point of it? But in general, I think her takeaway from this whole experience and her experience throughout her Champions League coaching career is, please give us better officiating. Yeah,
definitely. There are a few sidebars to this. The first point from a Chelsea perspective, I completely understand why they focus on this and on the disallowed goal. It also happened right at the end of the game when emotions are high, and then obviously that's going to overtake the post-match.
And right under Bonpastor's nose as well. Yeah, she was right there.
And right next to the press box and everything. So obviously that's going to inform a lot of the post-match discussion. Today, I think it would be a real shame if the wider media made that the story of this tie. I think there are a couple of other angles to it as well. From Katie McCabe's perspective, first of all, I'm told she tried to apologise to Alyssa Thompson face-to-face afterwards, but Alyssa Thompson had already left at that stage. I don't think she meant to pull her hair at all. I think she goes for the shirt, and it's a desperate situation, and she's just grabbing. I also think, Katie does some shit housing from time to time. It hasn't escaped people's notice, and generally she's quite unapologetic about it. On this occasion, I think she's so apologetic so immediately that I don't think she intended to pull the hair. Alyssa Thompson has quite long hair. She's very, very fast as well, so I'm not victim blaming there. I don't want to hand wave it. It should have been a red card. I will also point out for comedy for the comedy. I'm sure Anton from Sky Sports won't mind us pointing this out, but he asked Sonia in the post-match press conference about it, and Sonia said, kind of rhetorically, I don't know if you've ever had your hair pulled. Now, Anton, I hope he won't mind me saying, is a bald man. And to which he answered, funnily enough, no, that's never been a problem for me, which kind of actually created a bit of levity.
It did lighten the mood. I think Sonia enjoyed it.
Yeah, she said, actually, that's made me laugh, and that's kind of maybe de-escalated things. But no, I think she's just trying to pull the shirt, and she gets the hair. It should be a red card, but there's like 30 seconds left. I think it has no bearing on the tie. For me, again, my biased takeaway is Katie McCabe played about 100 minutes of a Champions League quarter-final against Chelsea at centre-half, and other than that, didn't put much of a foot wrong. But Chelsea fans, Chelsea manager, of course I understand. The Chelsea fans and the Chelsea manager, it's not their job to be partisan or look at this tie objectively. If I were in their shoes, I would focus on this, and maybe even more on the disallowed goal in the first leg, because I think that has a bigger bearing on the tie potentially.
Yeah, because it could have been 3-2 heading in, and there was only going to be one goal in it. And I also, to her credit, Sonia Bonpastor did, when we came around and got through the flashpoint in the post-match, because when you are in a post-match, the most controversial moment in the game is always going to be asked first. So once we got that bit out the way, she did say her, word for word, missing the chances cost us a spot in the semi-final. Yep. And she came around to that reality, and I think that's important for me to reiterate. That is that across both legs, Chelsea did more than enough to win this tie, and they didn't. And in the first leg, it was so even, it was so neck and neck. The difference was that Arsenal took their chances.
Yep.
And Chelsea were to defend it as chaotically as they have done for many weeks. Now, the difference in this game is they were more organised defensively, but also there was less pressure of them because of the state of the game. I do think, for me, when I look at Chelsea's performance, the positives, if they can take anything, is another unbelievable performance from Viola Berman. I am just so impressed with her. She was playing at left back in this game, so she was kind of closest to where we were in the press box, Tim. And she just, anything that Olivia Smith or Caitlin Ford tried to do, she was all over it. It's easy to forget she's 19. I don't think people expected her to play as much as she has done this season, either at centre-back or as at full-back. She's had to do it because of injuries. She had another brilliant game within a very poor back line these past couple of weeks. So that, it is great for Chelsea. But overall, you just come away from this tie thinking, there is so many different scenarios that could have played out. And the scenario was, I think Arsenal locked in a bit more with their experience of having been there, done that now in this competition, and that matters a lot. And with this group, there's a calmness as well to them, I think. Yeah,
definitely. And obviously it's all outcome based. That's basically the story of this tie, is it's completely outcome based, and there could have been several different outcomes. I think from an Arsenal perspective, I think you're right. Arsenal stayed relatively calm other than stoppage time. When the game became very chaotic, the decision for me from an Arsenal perspective that really decides this tie is René Slagers puts Daphne van Domselaar back in goal. Annika Borber played the first leg, and I mean, look at what Chelsea had to do to score in that first leg. Absolute worldie, top corner. But honestly, there was a little voice in the back of my head when that went in that just thought, and I'm not saying this is Annika Borber's fault at all. I think very few goalkeepers would have saved that. But there was a little voice in my head that said, Daphne could have. I'm not saying she definitely would have, but I wouldn't be surprised if she did. And she plays the North London derby on Saturday, clearly to get her ready for this. She makes a mistake in the North London derby, and I think it would have been so easy and understandable to go back to Annika Borber. And Daphne's had fitness issues this season, hasn't been herself, but when it came down to it, game for your life, we have to win this. René went, she rolled out the big gun in goal. I think Annika Borber has proven herself to be a really good goalkeeper, but Daphne's world class. And she showed that in this game.
And also, let's not forget, before she made the mistake in the North London derby, she pulled off a brilliant save that we saw similar to last night as well, in that she gets across so well to make those real kind of like diving, reaching saves. And she had to do that last night. And yeah, I think she was probably Arsenal's game-changing player in that moment when they needed her. We've had an interesting question from Kate, and it is, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, Tim, so it's a few steps ahead. But Kate has said, with Barcelona's squad feeling a little bit depleted this season, Chelsea are already knocked out. On the basis Arsenal could have success in Europe again this season, so we are jumping ahead, on the basis that they beat either Wolfsburg or Lyon in the semi-final and then beat whoever, probably Barcelona, who makes it through in the other semi-final, right? She's asked, how do you read their season? Because it would be another huge success. I mean, even getting to the final was another huge success if they were to do that for Arsenal. But will there be still frustrations about they still haven't managed to challenge in the WSL? We know for fans and in general, winning the Champions League is huge. But will there still be this slight niggle of how we not being able to do this across the whole season, and we're still really basically killing it in knockout competitions, the hardest knockout competition of them all, but we can't quite do it across the season?
100%. And I think Jessie said maybe on this pod last week or something, like Chelsea and Arsenal are looking at what each other has and kind of thinking, actually, we're happy with what we've got, but I want that kind of thing. And I thought it was really telling after the Tottenham game. I think it was Emma Sanders from the BBC who asked Renee, are Arsenal peaking at the right time? And straight away, like a bullet, Renee said, September to May is the right time to peak, and that's what we need to do next season. So she was almost dismissive of like, okay, yeah, it's nice, this peaking in the spring or in the second half of the season, but that's not what we want to do. We want to be across the whole season. Definitely there will be regrets on that, and I think all Arsenal fans really want that league title challenge. We'll take another Champions League if it's on offer. I have to say, I mean, Arsenal played Lyon in the group stage, and I think they're the best team we've played this season. I think they're the only team that's thoroughly deserved to beat Arsenal in all the games they've played this season. So if it was them, for example, in the semi and they've got work to do, I'd still have Lyon as favourites, just about. However, yes, absolutely. That will be, whatever happens for Arsenal this season, that will be all the talk this summer.
But you have to give them credit for, again, we were looking at how they started the season, and I don't think many Arsenal fans, after the way that they started the season, and actually a bit of pressure that Renee Slegers was under, I think about after that 0-0 draw in the North London derby, which was probably one of the lowest points of the season. And now we're sitting here and they're in the semi-finals of the Champions League again. They could be getting, to an FA Cup final, which would be huge, given they haven't won that competition in a very long time. They've still got a few games to go there. But that is massive.
It is. I kind of, what's nagging in the back of my mind, though, when we talk about like projecting ahead to next season, Renee said something about how she'd studied Champions League squads that tend to get quite far. And she said they tend to be quite experienced. They tend to be quite kind of late prime. And that's where this Arsenal squad is. And it's probably not where it's going to be next season. There's going to be a lot of change. And I think what will be really interesting, as well as being like locked in and comfortable on the European stage, this is a team that's been together for a very long time. And I think that really shows as well. And that really made a difference in this game and other games recently. And next season, that's probably not going to be the case. They're probably going to lose a few big players, which is pain they have to take because it has to happen eventually. So maybe, at the risk of getting my excuses in early, maybe September and October we're trying to bed in new players. We've lost big players who've been together for years. I guess that's my slight bookmark, actually.
But that's actually interesting when we think about it from a Chelsea perspective as well, because I think they're already in that, but they've still got more big players to lose, because everything about the Hayes transition was coming around to this sort of reality. Bon Pastor has so much success in her first season, so I think it papers over the cracks a little bit in that they do have some players that they need to move on, and Hayes was so good at doing that, almost in a brutal way. We think about Harder and Eriksson and Kirby and those departures, and G, it was very much, your time is done, we're moving on, we're picking up young, exciting talent, and we're going to phase them in, whether that's through the academy or it's recruiting from elsewhere. They've always kind of done that. But this summer is going to be really interesting for Chelsea because they've already got some players that they've bought who are now bedded in. Germer, if she can stay fit. Thompson. Looks like Nuskin may stay now. Berman, for example. So they've got those newbies who would feel quite comfortable, but they are very likely losing Kerr. They've already lost Wrighton, Bright. We'll see who else might go. So they're also going to be trying to figure out, okay, where's the experience now leaning? How do we navigate that? They definitely need a centre forward. But I'm going to be interested how they try and navigate that similar situation. Definitely.
I think Bright and Kerr are the big ones because those are two big totem pole players. I'll also say, Lucy Bronze played centre-back last night. I know she didn't cover herself in glory against Aston Villa. I thought she was outstanding on Wednesday night, especially managing the pace of Stina Blackstenius. But she's another player who's 34, I think, maybe. So that's another player that's not going to be there forever. So, but I think, if we're talking about Chelsea being a bit profligate in front of goal in these two ties, Kerr is a big one, because I've seen Arsenal dominate Chelsea much more than they did over these two legs.
I correct you, sorry, she's 34 now.
Okay. And I've seen Arsenal be quite dominant against Chelsea, and then Sam Kerr pops up from nowhere and scores a goal, something she's done many, many times in her career. And that's a big ace up the sleeve to lose, and it's going to be so hard to replace.
And actually, we've mainly shouted out defenders on this pod, but Lotte Moy, another brilliant performance. So flowers to Berman, bronze, and Lotte Moy in a tie that ended up having 5 goals across the 2 legs.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to take a bit of a left turn, can I say, first of all, disappointing Jessie's not here. I would have waived my fee to be able to sit next to Jessie this morning, and I've sat in their seat, which can be interpreted very much as as a show of dominance. But on the train last night on my way home, I live in Dartford in Kent, so I'm sitting on the train kind of looking at my phone, smiling at the Sonia Bonpastor memes, going through Nunhead, and there's a big bang on the window, and I look up, and who else do I see but Edward Parker-Humphreys, decked out, Arsenal scarf, Arsenal shirt, giving it the fist. So I did see a Parker-Humphreys today.
Well, on that note, actually, shall we cue our Jessie Parker-Humphreys video, because producer Katie effectively bullied them into sending us a video from the pub. But Jessie was a willing participant, so let's see what Jessie had to say after the game.
My, as promised, voice note video from Stamford Bridge, because I'm not a coward of doing this after we lost. Kind of weird, because I feel like maybe I expected us tonight to get a little bit more battered than we did, and it's a strange feeling. It's not a feeling I've had that much with Chelsea in the Champions League, where I think lots of the games we've won and come through, we've not always necessarily deserved to, or like we've found ways that haven't gone with the game, whereas this one felt like a game where we had so many chances and opportunities to, I'm not saying we would have gone through, because you can't just add up opportunities, but opportunities to put pressure on Arsenal and make them think about the scoreline. And obviously we missed all of them. I thought honestly we played well. If you don't put stuff away, I think especially in this competition, you don't get the opportunity to play in the latter stages of it. I think that was kind of true last week as well. Yeah, it's kind of a strange feeling, because I feel like at points this season we've maybe looked a bit pathetic and looked a bit out of it, and I didn't think we looked like that tonight. Tough one to take, ultimately, but hey. You go again. We always go again.
So JPH sending us that about maybe 4 pints deep outside Spoons. There were also some Blue Lagoons consumed at the Spoons that the other Parker Humphries' boyfriend sent as commiseration. So if you can't down some Blue Lagoons after being knocked out of the Champions League, then when can you, right, Tim? I mean...
Absolutely, and they have just opened that Wetherspoons at Fulham Broadway.
And thank God.
And it is a bit of a godsend, it has to be said, because it's right next to the entrance to the tube station. In fact, you could almost accidentally walk in there instead of the tube station. And I'd love to have gone in there myself for a very different reason afterwards, but it was getting on for 11:45 by the time I got there.
But I think I want to pick up something Jesse said, which I thought was interesting, is when we, in the most recent couple of seasons, when we've seen Chelsea lose in the Champions League, more often than not to Barcelona, they've actually ended up, especially in the second legs, it really slipping away from them. They lose in quite catastrophic circumstances. This is the earliest exit they've had since 2021, when they fell apart in the group stages, thanks to Emma Hayes' diarrhea gate, which, lest we forget, another absolutely memeable moment. So this is, will go down as one of their worst, most recent seasons in the Champions League. But to Jesse's point, it does feel weird because it's not one of those ones where Barcelona just sort of blew them away and they could only really stay in it for half of one game or maybe one leg. They were very much in it for a lot of the portion of these two ties, and that's what probably makes it harder to come around for Chelsea fans to think we end up losing and it's not because we lost to Barcelona. Yeah,
they'll come out of this tie with regrets, basically, whereas Barcelona, easier to compartmentalise. They're the best team in the world, and they still are, I think. So you kind of it's much easier sometimes to deal with that. I had that a little bit after the men's Carabao Cup final, Arsenal against Manchester City. I found it really easy to digest because Arsenal were just outplayed, and it's like, well, okay, fair enough, we were outplayed. But when you come away from a tie like this and you think, if that had gone in, if this had gone differently, and it all could have, it was all in play. But at the same time, I kind of think you come out with some easily identifiable lessons, which are be more clinical, and ultimately Chelsea are going to have to solve that in the transfer market, and it will be really interesting to see how they do that and who they do that with. I don't doubt if any amazing striker is available, Chelsea will have the money and the wherewithal to go and do it, but is that player available? That's the question for me.
And lots of other teams also want a similar player. Yeah. And you're also now competing with NWSL high impact player rule, and they are throwing big money down. Sam Kerr linked to teams over there already. But I guess the positive for Chelsea fans, if there is a positive, and Jesse also reflect on that a little bit, which is they've looked really poor, not just since the start of the year, but throughout the season. And when it sort of mattered most, they did actually pull together across the two legs, some pretty good performances. And so with that, when they think about Bonpastor's new contract and phase 2 of, her time now with a summer of recruitment, that's probably, easier to take than a few weeks ago when she'd just been offered that new contract, Paul Green had left, and you were staring down the reality of what was looking, why have we given this person a new contract? Well, I think we saw flashes again of why they got her and why they feel like she's the one who's going to finally bring them European success. Yeah, definitely.
I actually think Renee Slagan and Sonia Bonpastor have kind of similar jobs, right? They're rebuilding big teams that have been together for a while, and in one respect that sounds and feels a bit scary, and you probably have a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a drop off. At the same time, both teams could probably look at Manchester City and say, actually what Manchester City did, they bought a load of good players and they got better. Like, simple as that. Like, they lost a big player like Chloe Kelly, for example. They've kind of lost other players, but they bought 4 or 5 really good players and it solved things. And so maybe there's a sense of kind of over-intellectualising or over-analysing it a little bit. I do think it helps that Man City have had quite a clear schedule. I don't think that's the only reason they're going to win the league by any means. But yeah, I think ultimately both of these managers will be judged on in the long term how they manage this rebuild.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens when City are competing in what is a more competitive, tougher competition. Now it's in the league phase. We know only a few teams drop out, but that is more difficult to manage. But let's get some reaction now and talk about the other quarter-final that was happening last night as Manchester United headed to Munich with work to do. They were trailing 3-2 to Bayern. They had to try and turn around the tie. We're going to chat to Kathryn Batte, who was in Munich watching that game. Well, Kathryn joins us now from Munich. Thanks so much for dialing in after probably a late night for you as well in Germany. Let's start with Manchester United's performance, because fans are a little bit frustrated in that they get that early goal. They are tied 3-3 in the game, but the match proceeds to sort of slip through their fingers as they sit back, invite Bayern pressure, and then with about 10 minutes to go, Bayern find the breakthrough. They then score again, and it's very much game over. So as you were there, kind of take us through how you felt like the game played out.
Yeah, I mean, Manchester United started so well, really kind of came out quickly, deservedly took the lead. And it felt like the game was there for the taking a little bit in that first half. Bayern, I think they were unsure as to how to play a little bit because they had the lead from the first leg. And I think they almost were a bit cautious and sort of sat back and invited that United pressure. They had a couple of chances after the goal, United, to extend their lead, didn't quite take them. And second half, you just knew Bayern were obviously going to step up and not be as bad as they were in the first half. And United just couldn't quite find that same level of energy that they'd had in the first 45 minutes. And it felt like a little bit they were playing as if they had like the goal lead and that they were going to go through if they just held on and didn't concede again. Whereas obviously, if they kept playing, they were going to go to extra time. And I sort of sat there and thought, surely they're not playing for extra time, because they didn't really have the options off the bench to keep going for that. When we spoke to Mark Skinner after the game, he sort of said the aim wasn't to go defensive. It was just that they didn't have the energy to sustain the levels that they had in the first half in the second, which was a shame. But I mean, I think the most disappointing thing for United was that the 2 goals came from set pieces. And all through the game, Bayern had looked dangerous from set pieces. And we've seen over the last few weeks that United have really struggled to defend crosses and defend from set pieces. So when the 2 goals went in, you couldn't say that they hadn't been warned. They just, for some reason, they're really struggling to defend them. So, it was disappointing for them that, the way that they kind of lost the game, I think.
Yeah, Maya Letizia specifically referencing how frustrated she was after the game around conceding those goals from set pieces. United only named in total 6 players on the bench, 2 of whom were keepers. So it was a very light bench. And we know that they are struggling with injuries and they feel like they don't have the squad depth compared to their rivals. And we saw that play out yet again in this game, like it did in the Manchester derby, like it did in the first leg, like it has done really throughout the second half of their season. But United fans feel like it's a bit of a broken record now with that. And I think we spoke about it on the pod earlier this week. We've spoken about before the balance between what feels like excuses and what feels like the reality for this team. And because they did get themselves in such a good position, like you said, Kathryn, and they had chances to actually build on that lead, it really does feel like such an opportunity missed, regardless of the sort of gutted but proud tag you can give it. Because going into this tie against Bayern Munich were very much the favourites. In the first game, United concede early and it looks like, oh God, it's going to be a bloodbath. And they actually recover well. It ends up only being 3-2. Then to go away to the Allianz, where probably no one really expected them to have a chance at going through, to give yourself around 80 minutes or so where you were still in it, kind of holding on for extra time. And then you end up in this reality of not getting through but being so close. That's almost worse. And we come back to this same thing of, it was right there, but it felt like you didn't go for it.
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, there's 2 kind of schools of thought with it, is that on the one hand, Mark Skinner's hands have been tied because they've not invested enough and they haven't got the squad depth. So when they get injuries, they're limited in what they can do. And on the flip side, it's that, well, we've heard this before, and he should be getting more out of the players that he has. And I think both things can be true at once. And I think United actually showed in that first half what they are capable of. And Mark Skinner said after the game, if we'd had our injured players available, I think we would have gone through. It's a very easy thing to say when they're not there. Bayern will point to the fact that Clara Bull wasn't available for them, and I think she makes a massive difference. And I just don't think Mark Juice used his substitutes right yesterday, because when Bayern equalised, and United needed a goal to stay in the game, they were so slow to get those two subs on, Leah Schuller and Gabby George. And there's nothing frustrates me more as a fan when I'm watching, or as a journalist, when you're in that sort of situation and you need to get your subs on quickly and it takes so long, and they're sort of being given information, and I think it's the 80th minute. Whatever you're telling Leah Schuller at this point, it should just be go on the pitch and score a goal. She doesn't need to know anything else. So that was kind of frustrating. And by the time they came on, Bayern had scored another goal and it was game over. So it was sort of pointless bringing them on anyway. And I think things like that fans find a little bit frustrating as well. And I think, listen, you have to have a little bit of sympathy for Mark Skinner, because they have had so many injuries, and it was always going to be difficult. And, we've had loads of conversations about the investment and whether it's enough or not. But you can also question some of the tactics last night, and I think it's fair to do so. And interestingly, Maya Letizia said after the game, she didn't think the amount of games was an issue, and that she didn't want to use it as an excuse, and she seemed more frustrated about the way they conceded the goals. So interesting to see that point of view as well.
Yeah, Kathryn, I was going to ask you about Leah Schuller. I saw you tweet about this and the kind of lack of preparedness, and obviously there's another angle that Leah Schuller has just signed from Bayern Munich and knows this team very well. It's probably quite disappointing for her as well to come on with so little time left, and it just strikes me that if you've only got 4 outfield subs and 2 of them are Gabby George and Leah Schuller, and your team is tired, like that, those players really should be on a lot earlier. And I wonder whether Mark was asked about that specifically post-match.
He wasn't, no. I think his kind of assessment of it was that he was trying to conserve, what they had, I think. And he was very disappointed in how the game had gone. And I think when he was talking about the energy levels, it was more kind of sort of saying he was trying to save his players, almost the ones that were coming off the bench, because obviously if they went to extra time, I think that's why he was maybe waiting. That's kind of what he alluded to, but he wasn't specifically asked as to why it took so long to get them on. But I think he just talked so much about the lack of energy in the team, and I think that was kind of the thing that he kept going back to in the injuries. And yeah, I think by the time those 2 players were coming on, to have conceded that other goal was just it kind of really killed the game. So that was the frustrating thing for me. I think he needed to get those on quicker, but by the time he did so, it didn't really make a difference.
If I was going to make the Bull case or the Bear case, I always get those 2 things the wrong way around for United. They were in the qualifiers as well, so they've had a lot of extra games, and they did some business in January, but before that they were very, very threadbare. I guess how much sympathy do you... I have quite a bit of sympathy for Mark Skinner in this, even if I think there are some contradictory messages, puffing your chest out and saying we're Manchester United, but then when you lose, kind of saying, well, actually, we don't have the resources. I think Tom Gary reported, or he was looking at Manchester United's accounts, and they have half the salary bill of Arsenal. So I guess how much sympathy do you actually have when you take a step back for United in this situation?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that situation where the 2 things can be true at once. I think you can have a lot of sympathy for Mark Skinner in that he hasn't had the levels of investment that other clubs have had. They have played a lot of games, as you mentioned. That their season started in August, and that was always going to be difficult. But at the same time, they just didn't do enough, especially in that summer transfer window. To help themselves, and part of that obviously isn't Mark Skinner's fault. That comes from the club. I mean, the 3 players they signed in the summer I thought were really good signings, but the fact they didn't sign a defender I thought was appalling. And then they obviously brought Lundqvist in January, but they really, really needed a centre-back because Maya Letizia has played pretty much every game, every minute of every game. And I think the last few seasons in the WSL, she's played every single minute of every game. And she shouldn't be playing every single minute of every game, not when you're competing in so many different competitions. And they've not had that rotation. And Mark then starts to say, oh, well, the tiredness is that's why we're making the mistakes and that's why we're conceded from set pieces. It's not because we can't defend set pieces, it's because we're tired. But you've not had that ability to give someone like Maya Letizia a rest at all during the season. So I think, yes, there is a lot of sympathy there because I don't think the club have supported him enough, and I don't think they care enough, like when it comes down to it, unfortunately. And then on the flip side, you can still kind of ask questions of the manager about how he sets the team up, whether he's used the rotation when he had the opportunity to do so enough before those injuries came in. I think back to when, after the January transfer window, when it felt like suddenly they had a few more options, there still wasn't that much rotation between the games. It was still sort of the same players starting each week. And then you talk about overuse injuries. So you go, well, have you actually used your rotation options enough throughout the season? I think you could ask that question as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Kathryn. I think both things can be true, but I do think even when you look at, for example, the fact that Janssen's unavailable, Millie Turner is not a Champions League footballer. And that's not to do her down. I think that's just the reality of what her peak is in this team. And she has been really poor in this block of games where she's had to step up and replace Janssen. And that shows on that level. And going into their first ever European campaign, which we have to give them credit, getting to a quarter-final is huge for them in their first ever time doing it, and they will get their flowers for doing that. But you are going into that knowing what the demands that are going to be placed on your squads. And if you don't put that recruitment work in and spend the money in the summer, then you are going to run into trouble. And I think that's the reality. And also Jade Riviere, I think she's a brilliant footballer, but she's a footballer who's had injury issues her whole career. Ever since she arrived at Manchester United, she's had problems. So I also think, when you start a season, she's done really well to stay as fit as she has this season, because we have previously only seen her in these short period of games. But she's someone I know, right, I'm going to need that cover. Lundqvist, she can kind of play on both sides. Anna Sandberg, there was so much over-reliance on her, and then as soon as she gets injured, because they were playing through that left-hand side so much, then they're kind of scrambling a little bit. So yeah, I think both of the things can be true at once, in that they can be frustrated with the higher ups about perhaps not getting the resource, especially when it comes to wage bill. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science to see why players are leaving Manchester United and going to Chelsea, City and Arsenal, because the wages are a lot higher, and it's going to get harder and harder for them to keep that talent and keep recruiting to replace that talent if they don't measure up and meet the salaries of their rivals, because they, more often than not in women's football, maybe apart from the London City Lionesses example where they are in the table, but where your salary are, it is kind of dictates where you finish. And Manchester United will likely potentially end up as the fourth best team in the league this season with the fourth highest salaries and of that top four group. Let's take London City out of that equation. Kathryn, there were some interesting comments, though, from Mark Skinner after the game in relation to a question that you asked about expectation being too high. Because, yeah, we've spoken about this so much on the pod this season about United fans, some of them having this expectation, which is we want to be competing on the last day for the WSL trophy. We should definitely be getting to the last, to the quarterfinals of the Champions League, etc. And then United almost feeling like where they are now is about par, and it being a clash of expectation. And not only that, is that Mark Skinner traditionally throughout his time at United has not really talked about the hierarchy that much. He has been a little bit of a yes man, and I think that's one that sort of suits all parties a little bit, because he's not like Casey Stoney. He's not loudly calling out and aggressively demanding more of the club. He sort of does say, oh, we're doing the best with what we have. But last night, he did kind of show signs of saying, actually, I need more than this.
Yeah, I think he went as far as he possibly could without going into Ruben Amorim territory. It was interesting how he described it. I think he said sometimes you need a punch in the face to wake up. And those are some really good lines in there, actually. He said, we need to, the club needs to, think seriously about what they want to achieve. And then, he said, when you've seen the level of investment that's required to go to the latter stages in this competition, and then it's up to us. So he really was kind of putting the onus on the club. Because we wear Manchester United's badge, everyone expects us to be the best team in the world. He also said he was really proud of the players with how they're doing on the resources they had. So there was quite a lot of hints there that he's not really happy with the amount of budget he's been given over the last few years. So interestingly how that's going to be received. He's got a year left on his contract. Whether the club just let that run and whether he just lets that run and next season is his last season, or whether and they view it depending on what happens next season, it's going to be interesting to see. But you wonder whether he gets frustrated to the point of where he considers his future, because we saw Casey Stoney walk away from that football club a while ago now because she wasn't getting the levels of investment. And you wonder, would Mark Skinner consider doing that if it continues, or is he happy to just kind of be this frustrated figure and call it out as much as he sort of thinks that he can do, but ultimately just sort of stay in the job, and keep going? Or is he prepared to sort of take that stand and say, no, I'm going to walk away? Well, maybe we'll find out in the next kind of few months.
I don't know. And my gut would be he wouldn't do that unless a good opportunity came in which he could walk away and it's to take on a new challenge. But I think as long as this continues, there's always going to be this tension with the fans about his role. And that is a bit of a lose-lose situation for him. I mean, there are some fans that all managers are never going to win over. You can't live your life as a coach trying to placate your biggest enemies and the ones, the fans that are never going to like you no matter what you do, no matter what you win. But it does feel like we're going to keep going round in circles here until there's some sort of change. And whether these post-match comments are enough to raise the alarm, I just don't think it will be, because we've seen with Ratcliffe and also the fact that the men's team are going through a transition at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen with Michael Carrick at the end of the season. There's always such a big circus around Manchester United Football Club in general. I think it does take a particular kind of character like Casey Stoney to create the sort of change that is going to be required, Tim, to actually push them above the reality that they're in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I won't give Jim Ratcliffe a lot of credit, but he's put his cards on the table. He's said it plainly that this is a secondary consideration. He is on record as saying that. And while that is the case, you're right, this will be circular. And perhaps there is a point where, at what point do you say, well, this is Manchester United, they should be doing more? And at what point do you say, well, actually, yeah, they have the fourth highest salary bill. This is probably about par for them, and you can dance around the edges of that. Maybe you can get a different manager but really you're playing at the margins there. Like, can you get a little different manager who maybe gets you third or second? What more can really be done? And that's where I have sympathy for him. So I the conversations you guys have had on this podcast, I completely agree. I agree that sometimes you just say things that suit you and things like that. But at the same time, I really think if Manchester United change their manager, the best that might happen is they might squeak into third and they might maybe get over the line in a final, but ultimately they're always going to bang up against this wall, particularly in the WSL, where there's three teams that really, really invest heavily. If Manchester United played in France, they'd probably finish second, but they don't. And so I personally think that the kind of the focus as much as I can understand being frustrated with some of Mark's comments, maybe his tactics, etc., I still think the majority of the focus is just on the ownership there for me.
And this is this is just how it's going to be unless something bigger changes. And you do think, okay, another coach comes in, but if you're still not getting that investment, what difference does it make? And the funny thing is, Kathryn, is that we've ended up with the result that everyone would have expected, which is Bayern Munich progressing and not Manchester United. But because of United's performances actually across the two legs, we've got a lot more frustration to talk about from a United perspective than we probably actually would have thought going in.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, United are not in the top 4 teams in Europe. Like, they have not really any business being in the Champions League semi-finals. But when they're playing against Bayern Munich and they've given themselves an opportunity in both legs, and you've seen the weaknesses that Bayern had defensively, you sort of think, well, they could quite easily have ended up in the semi-finals and would have been fair enough to get there, but they just didn't take those opportunities. And I think that is the most frustrating thing for the supporters, is that it didn't feel like they were that far away. It wasn't like they were hammered in both legs. They really had an opportunity, and even with all the injuries that they've got, and yet they still just couldn't get themselves over the line. They still conceded those kind of really soft goals. They still switched off in moments that they shouldn't have done. And that is a disappointment for them. And I think quarterfinals is about where they should be. As I say, I don't think they're in the top 4 teams in Europe, but sometimes teams that are not in the top 4 teams in Europe still get there because they can find a way to get over the line, and Manchester United just don't have that at the minute. As Tim said, we've seen it in all the finals that they've competed in. For whatever reason, they just come up a little bit short. But so having said that, they should be able to take quite a lot from this overall Champions League journey. Granted, they might not be in the competition next season, but I think overall of how they've performed in Europe across the season, they should be quite proud. The players, definitely, in terms of the performances they've put in. But there will be disappointment that they've just not kind of taken that opportunity to maybe make it, an even better season.
And if you'll forgive me for putting an Arsenal lens on this, because that's my natural inclination, Arsenal played Wolfsburg in the Champions League quarter-final in 2022, and they were bested over 2 legs in a pretty similar way to Manchester United were. And, when we think about the game last night, Arsenal now look like a team who are really comfortable on the European stage, and they've built from that. And if I were Mark Skinner, talking to the likes of Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos, you'd point to that and say, this is where Arsenal were a few years ago, and within 3 years they won the tournament. And it is a building block. Europe is about learning how to do it. So I agree with Kathryn that this could be a valuable education for them.
Kathryn, any fun plans in Munich before you come back to the UK with the few hours that you have there?
Sadly not. I think I'm going to try and squeeze in a coffee before I head to the airport, but that's about it. We did manage to drink after the game. Me, Tom and Emily were obviously out in Munich, and we were watching the Chelsea-Arsenal game on Tom's phone as we tried to find a bar to go and have a drink in. So we were watching all that chaos unfold. But it just made me laugh that Tim thinks Jim Ratcliffe is going to answer Mark Skinner's call. He absolutely does not have his number. He's probably never spoken to him in his life. I mean, the guy didn't know who Katie Zellum was, so if he knows who Mark Skinner is, then that's quite an achievement.
Very true. Good point. It just comes up with unknown number and he just doesn't answer the phone. Kathryn, thanks so much. Appreciate you joining us the morning after the game, and we'll see you very soon.
Thanks, guys. Nice to speak to you.
Well, Tim, so much to chat about today. I know that the discourse is going to rumble on for probably the rest of the week. The whole Easter weekend is going to take over any chance of Women's FA Cup conversation. And we're probably going to see more freeze frame close-ups of Katie McCabe pulling Alyssa Thompson's hair forevermore. But I think we'll sort of start this show we'll finish this show as we started, which was an amazing game, really enjoyable. Ultimately, Arsenal come out on top, but football's the real winner, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And forgive me if I'm more smug than usual on this show. We're recording it the morning after. I've only had 4 or 5 hours sleep, powered a bit by caffeine, but also I can't deny, as much as I'm trying to stay, as Rene would call, the controlled middle, I'm still floating a little bit. I hope that didn't come across too much.
No, I think, if I were in your position and I was an Arsenal fan, or if I was a Chelsea fan and my team had just got through to the Champions League, which is probably never happening in my lifetime, into a Champions League semi-final, then I would too be floating and feeling very good about it. And it's amazing to see Arsenal from where they were a couple of seasons ago, where they were even at the start of the season, to now be in back-to-back semi-finals, and to be the holders doing that is, seriously impressive, considering where they were at points under Jonas Eidevall. So,
and we'll take your thanks for the coefficient points we're gathering
so
for
true.
England. Everyone line up and give their thanks for that, please.
Yeah, write your thank you letters to Arsenal for those juicy coefficient points. It's Easter weekend, so that's why we're recording this, of course, on a Thursday and not Friday after the second quarterfinals. But we'll be getting updates on our socials from Jessie and Becky's trip to Barcelona, and of course the other quarterfinal, which is Wolfsburg-Lyon. So we'll be reacting to that next week. But there'll be no show on Monday because it's Easter Monday, so the Spotify studio is closed. So we're going to be recording on Tuesday, talking about the Women's FA Cup. Thanks so much, Tim, for joining us again, and we will see you all next week. See you then.